Dear guests, dear hosts, uh, welcome here. Thank you for welcoming us. My name is Ionuț Mihalake. I'm coming from the European Commission, DG Home Affairs and Irregular Migration, Unit Irregular Migration and Return Policy. My background actually is from Romanian Border Police and also several missions as a guest officer under Frontex operation. This situation gives me the opportunity to touch the problem from three different perspectives: from the perspective of a border guard, and then as a guest officer, or seconded guest officer, and now as a policy officer in the European Commission. I'm here together with some colleagues that I will introduce to you. And we have Mr. Per Quistholm, the Deputy Head of the Return Support Unit in Frontex. Then Tomasz Ubrucea, Director in the Federal Ministry of Interior in Austria. Marco van Handeren is the Head Division Europe and Projects of the Dutch Repatriation and Departure Service. Adriano Silvestri from FRA, Fundamental Rights Agency. And Mr. Guy Goodwin Gilles, Emeritus Fellow, All Souls College, Emeritus Professor of International Refugee Law. So we are here to discuss about the Frontex role in the return policy, return field. And I will start by, let's say, taking the words of our General Director, Mr. Matthias Rutte, why we have such a crisis. So it's also because of him, because he told us that when Chernobyl happened, he was there leading the General Directorate regarding nuclear energy. Then when the volcano erupted, he was in transport, and now he's in migration, so he's attracting crisis. I will think differently, that he is able to manage the crisis. So we have there in our hierarchy someone that will guide us to a solution to this issue. Migration flows we have since the beginning of time, so is how the nations formed. Yeah, that's why EU doesn't want closed European Union. Let's build a fence around all Europe. No, we want an open, but in the same time safe and secure European Union. So for this we have this EU return policy, which actually is an integral and necessary part of a comprehensive EU migration policy. Some years ago, return was a word that everybody was avoiding to pronounce in EU Commission, in EU Parliament. Nowadays, there is not a single day that in some important newspaper in Europe not to have an article on the front page regarding migration or regarding returns. Now we have a return directive. We have an action plan on return. We have a return handbook. So we are trying to approach differently this issue. And even in the EU Commission, we changed our way. Gone are the days when my colleagues were sitting only in the office, drafting parliamentary answers, answering to parliamentary questions or reports regarding implementing. No, we have even now colleagues from our DG in Italy or in Greece being operational there. And also the view of the agencies, and we have here Frontex, has changed. So in the return action plan is the first time when the principle more for more was used. What we do from the European Commission point of view, we have this action plan which gives around 40 measures in order to enhance the return system. And at the same time, it will boost the involvement of Frontex in this regard. And this started by creating the return support office. We can speak regarding EU migration agenda about the four pillar. So the first one is prevention, and how we do this? We do by providing information in the third countries regarding the real life, what is really happening with the migrant when he reaches Europe, because the facilitators, they are acting like a travel agency. You know, they give fake dreams to these migrants. So by providing good information, we can prevent. Secondly, discussing with the third countries in order to convince them that it's a must to receive back their nationals who are to be returned, who are not in need for protection. And we do this from the European Commission level in high hierarchy. I will give a short example with Bangladesh. It's really difficult because 13% from the general income of Bangladesh comes from money that their nationals who managed to find a job in EU, they are sending back to Bangladesh. So you must offer something in exchange in order to convince them. Then speaking about return, it's not against asylum system or against offering protection. No, they must go along. We have a very good system regarding asylum, but it was not developed for such amount of requests. So if we will not have in the same time a good return system, the asylum system will not function and will collapse, and the member states will not be able to follow. How is Frontex involved in all these steps? So we have Frontex in border management, being there at the borders, supporting the member states. We have Frontex organizing return flights and organizing the cooperation with the third countries. And the involvement is more and more. And because there is no one else among us here at the panel that knows better about this, I will give the floor to Per, who is here since the beginning of the times in Frontex, and maybe he can tell us about what has changed in the last few months.
Thank you, Jonas. I will very briefly, I hope, 5 minutes, inform a little about the past and also the present, and perhaps also a little about the future. So one of the Frontex mandate on return is to assist and to ensure the coordination of joint return operations. It's a mandate that came into the Frontex regulation a little, let's say, 5 minutes to 12, and we will say, why Frontex? It is in several member states the task of border guards and border guards organizations to carry out return, and by analogic, it also became a task of Frontex. We had the first joint return operation back in June 2006. It was to Armenia and Georgia. It was organized by Poland and Austria. Only 8 persons were returned, 3 from Austria, 3 from Poland, and 2 from France. But this was where we learned the first lessons, and this is where we started our cooperation with member states on return. Over the years, Frontex has assisted and coordinated 378 joint return operations, in which 19,669 illegal staying persons have been returned to their country of origin. Over the year, almost all member states participate in Frontex coordinated joint return operations to 27 different destination countries. It is an obligation for Frontex to ensure that any return support is conditional upon the full respect of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. In 2013, a code of conduct for joint return operations coordinated by Frontex was developed. The aim of the code is to set out common principles and main procedures to be observed in the joint return operations coordinated by Frontex. It assures return in a human manner and with full respect for fundamental rights and is applicable to all participants taking part in joint return operations coordinated by Frontex. Joint return operations are seen by destination countries as EU operations and not as organized member states or operations. Frontex flag has a guarantee of good performance that is appreciated also by countries of origin. So what have been the main benefits of cooperation? The cooperation on joint return operation has increased the operational cooperation among member states on carrying out the practical return of illegal staying persons. It has also increased the cooperation with some receiving countries and has shown an EU approach to the practical return of illegal staying persons. The cooperation on joint return operations is also linked to the sharing of capacities, both on sharing an existing capacity on chartered aircraft, but also the capacity that a member state has on return to a specific country. It's well known that some member states, for example, due to historical relations to a destination, are able to smoothly return, while other member states are facing problems that sometimes can be difficult to solve. Cooperation and sharing of capacities is therefore also to share the good relations and assist other member states in solving problems which might occur, for example, via the cooperation with Frontex and also with the EU-financed projects, Euron, EULO, etc., and of course also the Commission. I would say this is another way of showing operational solidarity. This is an area where member states could increase cooperation also without hampering their own good bilateral relation. Frontex coordinated joint return operations are always based on common needs identified in the member states and the willingness of a member states to be the practical organizer of an operation. Unfortunately, identified needs do not always go hand in hand with the possibilities. There are still several receiving third countries that do not accept that kind of operations. For example, are there in several member states a need for return to the Maghreb countries, but none of them accept joint return operations. In our planning for joint return operations in 2016, we expect to assist and coordinate 100 to 120 operations, a significant increase in comparison with previous years. The member states has faced tremendous increase in the migration flow. To support the member states in the return of those who are not granted residence permit, the budget for Frontex to finance return activities are for 2016 increased significantly. There are three elements that has to go hand in hand when stepping up activities in an organization. It also applies to Frontex. The budget, yes, but also sufficient number of staff, and for an organization like Frontex, the legal mandate for the activities. We are increasing the number of staff, but the mandate is still the same, at least until we have the new regulation. We have therefore had a look at the narrow mandate for Frontex to assist member states in return, which is linked to joint return operations as the key word. So we have revised our financing scheme, and in this revised financing scheme, we have a much broader interpretation of the terminology joint return operation. And it is as the following: return operations where there is an element of connection between two member states. So not any longer that it has to be returnees from two member states, but some kind of connection between two member states is sufficient for us. Return operations from one frontline member state with hotspots, or from one member state facing a disproportionate number of persons staying irregularly in its territory due to the specific and disproportionate migratory pressure at the external borders, as they serve the common interest of all EU member states. So I think this is the key word here, that it has to serve the interest of all EU member states. With this much broader interpretation of the Frontex mandate, it is expected to increase the number of assisted and coordinated joint return operations, as mentioned previous, to 100 and 120 operations in course of 2016. But an increasing of operations is also depending on the willingness of the member states to organize operations, as Frontex cannot by itself do that. Frontex has assisted Greece in the practical implementation of readmissions to Turkey, based on the Greece-Turkey bilateral readmission protocol. So far, 12 operations has been assisted and financed by Frontex, bringing 441 persons to Turkey with ferries and for 2 operations with aircrafts. It is remarkable that the migration flow to the Greek islands has decreased significantly after the start of the readmission operations, although only few operations has been carried out. So here in the end of my statement, allow me to come with some conclusions from my experience with return operations. An efficient border management and the fight against smuggling and trafficking of human beings are crucial in controlling irregular migration, but cannot stand alone. They have to be embedded in an efficient migration and return policy. Otherwise, the migration flow cannot be managed. Expressed in another way, we can stand shoulder by shoulder at EU external borders for the efficient border management. But if there is no efficient return management in place, the migration management remains fragmented. The return cooperation on EU level is therefore key for successful control of irregular migration risk at EU external borders. Thank you.
Thank you, Per, for this real good inputs and good news. Yes, so we are trying to enhance this effectiveness of return system by using also money. So we increased the budget of Frontex, and I can tell you even more than 6 times. Then we are also using money to help the transit third countries in order to increase the capacity of receiving migrants, like we do in Turkey with this readmission agreement. But because we saw the view from Frontex side, and to take advantage that we have Tomas here, maybe we can see from a member state point of view what is the added value of having Frontex, and how you are cooperating with Frontex and with other member states in regard of return and effective returns.
Right, thank you, Jonat. Good morning also from my side. Speaking partly also on behalf of the member states, I would say that the involvement of Frontex helps the member states a lot. And it is a very important involvement, especially nowadays when we look at the global development, the issues are going on. It's more than ever necessary to have a common approach to overcome these problems. And as Per just said before, we can't stand alone on this. So a common approach is necessary more than ever, because the individual member states are not able to handle these migration waves and developments. Besides a lot of benefits which are provided to us member states through Frontex, just want to pick up 2 issues out of this and go a little bit deeper into it. Or in fact 3, just the 3rd point crossed my mind. The first, and I think most important issue, is the monetary issue. Frontex is financing and co-financing joint return operations. And this is because the financial means of the member states are limited. The high numbers of JROs we are doing currently wouldn't be or the member states wouldn't be able to do this on their own budget. Just to give you an idea, on the last 2 years on agreed and done joint return operations, in 2015 we had 65 operations, and now with the status of the last TCP meeting 2 weeks ago, the number is already 42. So you see the current joint return operations is slowly but steadily reflecting the current migrations, development and problems. And secondly, at this monetary issue category, I think economically weak countries wouldn't be able at all to have the budgetary means to run such charter or return operations at all. So the support by Frontex also enables these countries to use this mechanism to return people. Secondly, and also a very important role, is the coordination role of Frontex. I picked out three very, in my view, very important topics. The one is the TCP meetings, the direct contact point meetings. Every member state has a direct contact point who is the direct liaison person to Frontex. So every 3 months this coordination, in my view, very important coordination meetings take place. And this helps the member states a lot, because otherwise the member states would have the coordination work to be done by themselves with all the other member states of the European Union. And this would be, I think, not possible with sometimes a very limited personnel staff in the national offices. Then also the financial meetings give us a clear indication what will be covered during the return operations and what are the budgetary possibilities at all. And based on this, each individual member state could act accordingly with their planning through the years. And also the general coordination of each agreed JRO per se. It starts with the distributing of offers and managing and coordinating the interest of the member states in a certain joint return operation, the coordination of the capacities of the participating member states, speaking on the seats availability for returnees, for escorts, and last but not least, the providing of the implementation plan, which gives a very detailed overview to all participating member states during an operation on how the entire operation is set up. And the third point, which just crossed my mind, is also Frontex is a very good partner or efficient support if we have to overcome difficulties we are facing in return operations. So it's not always like this, that the return operation is planned at home and finished at the destination countries. We are facing a lot of difficulties executing a return operation. For example, a big issue is nowadays to receive landing permits or to receive landing permits in time. Sometimes it happened that we got the landing permit 1 hour, 2 hours before the planned departure of the main charter. Why is this so important? Because a captain of the air carrier would not start without having the number of the permit. So no one knows about this, but no permit number, no start. So it would be a lot of financial risk. The other thing is where we need to pressure the power of Frontex and behind of the Commission is a lot of top countries of migrations are refusing communication or negotiations on taking back their citizens at all. A third one is a lot of top countries are not accepting charter flights. Charter flights meaning joint return operations. They're only accepting individual returns by commercial flights. This has impact. First, it's a very time-consuming procedure to bring one after one out of the country. And secondly, it's also a financial issue because individual returns are much more cost-intensive than if you have a full plane of for using a charter plane. So, and also, which would be an important role by Frontex and the Commission is eventually to streamline problems which are existing in the member states. For example, I picked up two things in regard to pre-deportation detention. In many member states, the period before the execution of the operation, the detention period is much too less, or the legal basis does not provide a longer period, or the obligations like we have in Austria to inform the returnee as soon as we know about the joint return operation to destination X, we have to inform the returnee that he will be on this plane in 2 weeks. So both points I just mentioned result in the absconding of the returnees. So the return quota is in fact then at least drops down to 50% of the nominated one. So to sum up these three categories I just mentioned, you see that Frontex is playing the key point in it, and it is a very important interface in the coordination of, for us member states, in the coordination of joint return operations. And according to the opinion of all the member states, this role should remain as it is now. Otherwise, we could not manage the current work burden in our national return offices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tomasz. And I will come ahead to you, and I will tell you that for the coming year, believe me, the money will not be a problem. And also on 17th next month, there will be a meeting in Brussels where a lot of member states will be present, and also programs like EURLO, EURINT, and we are trying there to develop like a matrix, so-called. So each participant was kindly asked to come with the proposals, with ideas, with best practices of programs to be used in returns and also in voluntary returns. And we are trying to develop like I told you, like a matrix programs for certain countries. So doesn't matter which country we want to organize return operation, joint return operation via Frontex. We will see for this country, these steps are to be followed, this program will work. And we want that the member states will jump into the driver's seat regarding the using of funds, and to have their Frontex as a coordinator and the EU Commission as a neutral party to make better use of the programs that we already have, EURINT, EURLO, and to use for implementation like we have IOM. And I will go further, and Marco, because you are responsible for implementing readmission agreements like we have with Turkey, and also organizing charter flights. How this, let's say, agreement with Turkey changed some things? How this, did you see an increase in the number of returns, and how Frontex will be able to provide assistance, help, and for the future years?
Well, that's interesting question. Readmission is not only with Turkey, of course, as you know. Yes. I can say from the Dutch perspective, the readmission Turkey from the Netherlands is small. It has to start up. And when I talk to my other colleagues around Europe, it's the same. So when Per is right when he says it's works from the islands, but now we have to try to convince the Turks that it also works from the mainland. Because one of the things that the former panel said about border management is that, of course, that's the first step, preventing people getting in where we are not allowed to come or even to stay. And the Dutch repatriation partnerships, one of the principles, of course, is that we are therefore expediting the voluntary and forced returnee of departure for foreign nationals who are not allowed to stay anymore in the Netherlands. Well, that's the same for a lot of European countries. And if you take in perspective that nowadays 50,000 people are in Greece, waiting, stuck, and trying to get a new perspective. I think that's one of the big challenges that lies ahead of us. Not only the deals we have, but also how can we establish a European-wide, well-funded voluntary return system. As I know a little bit deeper on that one, on the voluntary part, as you know, the Dutch are proud to have 2 EU-funded programs, which one Per already mentioned. One is EURINT, European Return Initiative Program, and the other one is ERIN. ERIN stands for European Reintegration Network. And the good thing of it is both programs have a bottom-up approach, or as you could say, reserve management principle. So we asked the participating countries, European member states, EURIN 24, including Frontex, and ERIN 12, what do you need for support? What do you want to know? How can we share each other? And how can we strengthen our cooperation to be more effective in the end, returning? So it's not a one-way solution. The migration is not a simple solution, nor is there for return. So to have, at the end, just to put it here, if you say, what do we need? Because I think that's a good question. What do we need from now? Well, I think we also need to search for new methods. Because the Dutch DTV has been established in 2007. I was one of the persons from the start. And we're doing the work quite some time. I think a lot of people here are doing the work quite some time. But what do we know what works? How it works? Why it works? So I think that's the part we have to dig into. We need to keep sharing experiences. I think we need to invest in our return experts. I'm very glad that in the new mandate, the return takes a significant part. It also says about making sure that return is integrated, not only forced, but also voluntary. So I think we really need to invest in our experts. We need to set the goals we do together, shoulder on shoulder, as we have done with joint return operation, quite effective. And at least, well, to round it up, we need Frontex to step up, to take the role they really do with coordinating. I think there are a lot of pressure, because everybody wants it now. No time for solution, solution must be now. The numbers must go up. But we also need to link the activities between the programs, EURINT, ERIN, but also European Return Liaison Officer run by our Belgian colleagues. So I think that's the direction we should go.
Okay, thank you. So in order to increase the level of cooperation and to facilitate the cooperation between member states, we will soon have IRMA. IRMA will be a platform, and the first functional demo will be issued on 14th of June. It's a platform where each member state and the programs will have their own area. It will facilitate the exchange of information in a secure mode, even regarding data. So we will have their information regarding the return operations, how many returnees are available in each country, and this will be really for real help for the member states. Like I told you, we need to change our asylum system in order to face this big amount of applications. So my colleagues in these days, they are working for this. So there will be a revision of the Dublin Agreement, of the mandate of Eurodac, and actually all the asylum system. And speaking about this, Adriano, from your side, coming from FRA, what are the challenges from your point of view from the fundamental rights perspective to the role of Frontex. Because in my opinion, for example, the return directive is looking among this kind of law provision in the world, is the one with the most safeguards and provision regarding fundamental rights. But this is my opinion. So what is your vision? What will be the next step? What will follow?
Well, thank you very much for the floor. I think if we speak about fundamental rights challenges, or rather maybe risks when it comes to the operations carried out by Frontex in the field of returns relating to fundamental rights, what we need to have as a starting point, and I'm sure Professor Goodwinkel will delve into it more, is to be aware that return operations, particularly if they are forced return operations, are very sensitive from a fundamental rights point of view. I mean, they touch upon core fundamental rights, they touch upon rights which are absolute, for example, the prohibition of torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, the principle of non-refoulement. So challenges arise at two different levels, I would say, for Frontex. One is the more obvious level, and that relates to what Per has been describing at the very beginning, meaning that the joint return operations, the joint return flights that have been planned and implemented with with the coordination of Frontex, need to be carried out in a manner which is humane and respectful of fundamental rights, meaning that excessive force should not be used, there should be the necessary safeguards vis-à-vis vulnerable people, vis-à-vis people who have health concerns. And here, I think over the last 10 years, I think, 9 or 10 years so far that Frontex has been working in this area. A lot of developments have occurred, and a lot of safeguards were built into the core instruments that Frontex has been using to manage this part of its work. So I'm speaking in particular about the code of conduct, the best practices, etc. And here, I think some of these considerations, some of these safeguards, of these thoughts that were built into these tools, also with the help of FRA in the past, can also be applied to readmissions now, something which maybe in the discussion we can come back to, the readmissions to neighboring country from hotspots as are being carried out now with the help of Frontex in Greece, for example. So there is this level of challenge, which is the more obvious one, and then there is a second level of challenges or of risks, which is, I would say, a bit more hidden, but nevertheless equally important, and that links up to your question on the return directive. And that is based on the following. When Frontex comes in and assists, helps in moving the people, so in actually physically carrying out the removal, the forced removal, such forced removal is based on a legal procedure in a member state. So it's based on a return directive or a non-admission directive, on the return decision, sorry, or a non-admission decision. So there has to be a national procedure which is completed and final. Now, what happens if at a national level that national procedures has some shortcomings? I mean, as my international law professor used to say, nobody's perfect except God. So we all can make mistakes, and as we see also in the Schengen evaluation systems, there are areas of improvements in the return systems in member states. But is there a degree where the shortcomings reach a certain point that for Frontex there may be risks of ending up in a situation where it would facilitate a return of a person whose return decision had certain shortcomings or was not correct. And I think this is an area that requires much more work. I think it's to be welcomed that the revised regulations or the new agency which is being created allows also for Frontex to do some capacity building work in member states, so supporting member states in certain areas. And I think here it is really important that the standards and the safeguards, which indeed are in the return directive, Directive concerning the use of force, the necessity and proportionality of the privation of liberty, the treatment of children, and so on, are actually carried out and implemented in practice in the member states. So I think we have to keep in mind these two levels of challenges, those related to the Frontex operations themselves, so the implementations of the removals or readmissions, and those implemented, or those that derive in a way from the way member states implement the Return Directive, which as such is an instrument that has a number of safeguards which reflect, in fact, what the Charter of Fundamental Rights would require. So they are not established by the Return Directive, but are rather reflections of what the international human rights framework and the European Fundamental Rights Framework require, that these safeguards are implemented in practice. And here is also a role, there is also a role for us, for the Fundamental Rights Agency of the EU, where we can come in with provision of support and suggestions on how to navigate in this situation. So from our end, what we can contribute with to support this process is clearly one aspect of the return acquis, if we so wish, which is for us extremely important, and that is the so-called effective return monitoring systems, where the Return Directive requires a return monitoring systems to be established at a national level, which we consider safeguards for both the returnees but also the police officers, as you have independent monitors who can actually report on what has happened on the return flight or on the return operation if something goes wrong, which is neutral, which is objective, which is reliable. And in this context, we have been really in close cooperation with Frontex, organizing training of return monitors, and we are happy to continue and intensify our work in this area as required or as wished by our partners. Also, maybe in this context, it might be useful to mention that since the beginning of April, FRA has a staff member on the spot in the hotspots in Greece, where we have also been looking at readmissions and where we have provided Frontex with, as well as the Hellenic authorities, of course, the Hellenic police, with input on how these readmissions procedures are carried out. In our view, most of what we observed was very smooth, and suggestions on what could potentially be adjusted. And finally, I think what indirectly could also be helpful for Frontex are the results of the comparative research that FRA does. FRA has carried out, one of our tasks is to carry out comparative research to map what is happening in member states level or in the member states on different topics. We will release at the end of the year a study on immigration detention on children, for example, and we keep a regular update on what systems or who is responsible for forced return monitoring in the member states and how does this system function, is it operational or not. And these overviews can help Frontex also understand better what fundamental rights issues may arise when operating in the area of forced removals or readmissions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have to tell that, as you all know, European Commission is performing also Schengen evaluations together with experts from the member states, and in many occasions we have also an observer from Frontex, and this part, the existence and the effectiveness of a return monitoring system, it's a very important point on our evaluation. Per, I saw you wrote down some inputs. Maybe if you need to give some inputs regarding what our colleagues mentioned, only if you need.
Just brief remark to Adriano, because 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, the EU Ombudsman did on her own initiative an inquiry of joint return operations assisted and coordinated by Frontex without finding any kind of violation of fundamental rights. It was a very important inquiry for us and for the future for joint return operations, because of course the EU Ombudsman also had some recommendations that we now are implementing for the future. So fundamental rights, and you also know, this is also reflected in the code of conduct, is a crucial part of our operation, of our implementation of joint return operations, because as mentioned by Adriano, joint return operations are very, very sensitive, and we cannot afford that something goes wrong, because this can jeopardize the whole return program in Europe. So we consider fundamental rights extremely important.
Okay, as you all know, we are now revising the mandate of Frontex, and we are trying to bring it as close as possible to this European Border and Coast Guard. And while we are still under construction, let's say, if I may call it like this, I will kindly ask Mr. Guy if you can tell us which standards would you like to see included in the new mandate of Frontex, and also in the approach of EU regarding migration, irregular migration, on the return side, from the point of view of international law?
Thank you very much. Let me preface my remarks by saying a bit about where I come from. I am an international lawyer. I started my work on international law, the movement of people between states, in 1969. I spent 12 years with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees from 76 onwards at a time of major refugee crises. I founded the International Journal of Refugee Law, and I'm the author of a book called The Refugee in International Law, which is, together with my co-author, we hope, going into its 4th edition next year. I mention that so you can understand the legal baggage I come with, but I also come with some experience of what works and what doesn't, with some considerable disappointment at the short-termism of many governments and bureaucracies. But I also have expectations and a strong sense of what can be done positively, particularly in Europe, for migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, and therefore for the interests of states sending, receiving, and transit. There's 2 other points I want to make by way of introduction. They're not entirely relevant to what's already been said today. And the first thing is that nothing that's happened in Europe in the recent months and years was unforeseeable, whether we're talking refugees seeking greater security or migrants seeking opportunity. The numbers may have been unpredictable, but the general idea of movement was certainly foreseeable. The second point I want to make is that nothing can be assumed to be temporary. 500,000 Spanish refugees fled into France after the fall of Barcelona in January 1939. How many years was it before they were able to go back? In the letter of invitation from Mr. Leggeri, he referred, and he mentioned this word again this morning, to border guardianship, which I thought is actually a rather nice way of putting it, because guardianship looks in both directions. It looks both inwards and outwards. And if we couple that with the full cycle of migration management, then we can see how important a border agency is, a coast and border guard agency is, in relations to both access and returns. Having worked in this area for so long, of course, I went back to see what I might have said in the past, and lo and behold, 25 years ago in 1991, I argued that the UN High Commissioner for Refugees should also be interested in so-called rejected cases, because a generous and humane asylum policy is contingent on effective border management. As you might expect, the UNHCR was leery of getting involved in that field at the time, because returns can be controversial and they can certainly be difficult, as we've already heard. But nonetheless, I think it is quite clear that if you want to promote, as the UNHCR and the European community does, the European Union does, a humane asylum policy, there has to be effective border management as well. The other point that I wanted to stress too is the opportunity which I see here in this prospective expansion of the mandate of Frontex. It is, I think it seems to me, or could be, a first step to what I have been going on a bit too long about in the past year, a true Europeanization of the politics and practice of asylum, a need that I don't think is yet sufficiently or indeed at all understood by the Commission. perhaps because it is still too resisted by ministers of the interior at the national level. But there is, I think, a clear need to move from the national to the EU level. And I think we're seeing that working out in practice to some extent in Greece at the present time, thanks to the contributions made by Frontex and the European Asylum Support Office. And in a future European approach to asylum and protection and the better management of borders, I do see the ECBG, as it will probably be called, working as a critical player together with what I would hope to see also, which would be a European Migration and Protection Agency developing a European regime of protection and border management. And there would be a common mandate in that, it seems to me, of protection, which would govern through the mechanism, if you like, or through the invocation of fundamental rights, both the ECBG and the future European Asylum Agency. When we come to return responsibilities, I think we have, there are a number of things which could be said. First of all, something that I'll summarize by reference simply to the rule of law. This has come up in comments which I've read already to date in relation to the proposed mandate of Frontex, ECBG, in returns, and that is the quality of the return decision. What we've seen in the recent chaos in Europe is, of course, the consequences of the failure on the part of the European Union to achieve equivalence of protection throughout the European Union. The variation, the substantial variation in recognition rates, for example, amongst others, does put in issue the extent to which returns by a EU agency can be driven entirely by national decision-making. The agency will need to know that its responsibility, its legal responsibility, will not be engaged by reason of an incorrect decision-taking at the national level. And it has been suggested that the agency should be entitled to refuse to take in charge a prospective return where it has doubts about the quality of the decision-making. That, it seems to me, is another reason to press for a European approach, a European Protection and Migration Agency, which through the centralization, or at least the harmonization through the union of decision-making, could provide better guarantees of quality. The return process itself, too, well, we have enough standards, I think it's fair to say, in place. We know, for example, that returns should be carried out so as to ensure that the individuals in turn are treated in accordance with their human rights, that they are enabled to return in safety and dignity. There will always be challenges in operationalizing those standards, of that I have no doubt. Hence the repeated emphasis on the necessity for monitoring, which I think I can only endorse. Monitoring helps with transparency as well. It helps with accountability. It helps one to defend decisions and operations. It's not therefore just for the sake of window dressing. It is actually a very important factor in making things work. But then there is the outward-looking aspect, isn't there? And that is the international dimension. And this, again, I think is an area where the EU up to now has failed. The cooperation with third states is essential, whether they be sending states, transit states, or whatever. But up to now, the EU has failed to deal on these issues with those states on the basis of equality and equity. And it is hardly any surprise that those readmission agreements, those military agreements, do not work to perfection, because the EU has failed to give the quid pro quo which sending states expect. The European Parliament, in its report of October of last year, emphasized how the failure on these accounts was driven by short-term enforcement goals, the attempt to externalize immigration control, rather than being driven by consideration of the interests of the states in question. Yes, it's all very well to bang on about the duty of every state to readmit its citizens, but remember that from the perspective of a sending state, very often the citizen to be returned is not a criminal. They are very often a good citizen who has, as has already been mentioned, been sending money back, remittances, over a long period. There is no necessary interest, therefore, in a sending state readmitting its citizens when it knows that that citizen will carry on being a good citizen overseas. It's also worth emphasizing that there is, from a perspective of general international law, no such idea as transit state responsibility. Senegal, for example, is not obliged to readmit someone who is not a citizen, who simply happens to have passed through on his or her way to Europe. You can incorporate that in an agreement. But if you're going to incorporate that in an agreement, then you must expect as a negotiator to give something in return. And finally, in regard to the conditions of return in safety and dignity, a major challenge here, I think, and that's where it's particularly important that Frontex or its future and its future form should have a role together with the Fundamental Rights Agency, amongst others, in assuring itself that those who are returned will be able to do so not only in safety and dignity, but in a way which will enable them as positively as possible to reintegrate and rehabilitate themselves. And there is a wealth of practice out there, particularly through the International Organization for Migration, which could be brought in aid. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take only 2 minutes to give some answers. So I will not say that was a complete failure, but yes, we encountered some challenges, and that's why I was mentioning in the beginning that we changed our view and our approach. That's why in nowadays and till summer, the asylum package will be revised, and next year will follow the return directive and so on and so forth. We changed the approach toward third countries. We are participating and organizing more and more missions there on the spot. So even the Commission is becoming more and more operational in order to tackle this situation. And the fourth pillar in EU agenda on migration is legal migration. So by returning the ones that are not in need for a form of protection, we are helping actually the ones that are in need to take advantage of this by avoiding to block the system. By all this being said, if my colleagues have something to add, if not, I will give the floor to you. Only like in the previous event, we'll do the same. If someone has a question, just please stand up, introduce yourself, and address the question and towards whom is addressed. I don't know if there are microphones in the room. Otherwise, I will give one.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Inmaculada Arnaez, and I'm the Frontex Fundamental Rights Officer. I have a question. Would be a mix of maybe between Commission, Frontex, and Professor Godwin-Gill. This new role that we mentioned in voluntary returns for Frontex, do you see or do you foresee any scope for this particular aspect, which I found extremely relevant, which is the need to actually accompany any voluntary return with reintegration, so that the return is sustainable in itself, because this is the wealth of expertise that IOM has in this field. I don't know how much forgotten this is going to be in all this new development, and I wish to bring that to the table of the Frontex work as well. Thank you. For the three of them, whoever wants to start.
Okay, so I will start. Regarding the involvement of Frontex in voluntary returns and organizing charters for this, we have discussed this since a long time, and we finally reached to a point where Frontex can be involved in this. That people that have already returned the decision issued, and they are in the time frame from the voluntary return, can be returned also in a charter organized. Frontex can finance or co-finance something, a charter like this. Then, regarding programs after return, we are now trying to find ways to provide programs even for forced returns, not only voluntary returns. And the use of IOM, yes, for implementing, but we, like I told you before, we are trying that the member states should take the lead and not letting the IOM or other service provider to manage all the funds. So member states together with Frontex to take the lead and to make better use of this, to make better packages, to come with proposals, and we will have all this in that matrix that I told you about. So we hope that in the near future you'll see things happening.
Perhaps I can elaborate a little bit on that one, because I already talked a little bit about ERIN, it's called European Reintegration Network. Well, actually, we do as you say. European member states have a joint procurement where they jointly search for service providers in countries of destination, countries of origin, where people, when they return, get packages for voluntary support. They can mean they start their own business or even get school education. The most important thing is by doing that together as European member states, we don't only depend on one international organization. Either it's IOM, ICDP, or it doesn't matter. The thing I like best about ERIN is that it supports and it gives a boost economically also on the people in the country of origin working there, and via all the member states using the same service provider, it's sustainable. So that's the thing we have to take into account. Having programs, getting there, getting out, getting there, getting out, doesn't work. We have to be in broader and longer perspective. That's what we need. And I think we're doing a great job. I think Frontex is doing a great job. We have some voluntary flights, and we just need to use the strengths everybody has, every organization, and just be more, less competitive, and more cooperative, and more linking. I think we're on a good track, and as Professor said, it's not an easy one. And that's why I always say, well, it's not about return, it's also about reception, it's also about asylum. And being in the return field, you're always in the back when it ends, trying to solve the problem. But of course, we need to get in the front.
For me, it's a little strange that it has been discussed quite a lot here the last couple of months. It is strange to me because nothing in the Frontex existing regulation in Article 9 are talking about enforced return, neither of voluntary return. So it mentioned that we give assistance to member states and coordinate joint return operations. There's nothing mentioned about who the persons are. Our interpretation of this is also that we have nothing, there are no problem for us also in cooperation with member states on voluntary return. But it is linked to the terminology, the technical terminology from the return directive. We talk about voluntary departure, because this means that a return decision has been taken in accordance with the return directive by the member states. Otherwise, Frontex cannot be involved. And this is the interpretation of that. It will be separately mentioned in the new regulation, but actually there is nothing new for us on that. So if member states are interested, and there are some member states now that are interested, we will coordinate that kind of operations. I think we will see the first ones here in the near future.
Let me start with some numbers. In the 1990s, the UN and the International Labour Organization told us how many young people were entering the workforce and how many jobs needed to be created every year for the remaining years of that century. That was 30 to 40 million jobs per year. Were they created? No. 2015, the UN again tells us what the world population is and what is estimated to be. And one of the most, I think, staggering statistics is that the numbers of those in the 10 to 24-year-old age group will number 2 billion by the year 2050. That's to say those who are on the cusp of the employment market. Those are factors which I think need to be taken into account. And when we're talking about rehabilitation and reintegration of those returning, I would strongly encourage Frontex and its future form to think outside the box, beyond the externalization of control, to think way into the future. Remember, there are those sustainable development goals out there now, and they need, I think, also to be factored into thinking about the role that migration can play in the achievement of those goals, sustainable development. Possibly not very well known or known at all to Home Office and Ministers of the Interior. Therefore, I think a very strong need to ensure that those involved in development funding, amongst other things, are also brought into the process of putting together the policies on migration which will contribute to the achievement of these goals. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Andrea Nicoliu. I'm the strategic advisor of the executive director of Frontex, and I would like to ask you what are the main problems in the return process? Because we have seen in the risk analysis that one of the push factors of the migration is that the return system is not efficient. And related to that, I would like to ask you, because you made a lot of reference to the Schengen evaluation process, what would be the core elements that member states should provide answers in respect of returns? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, yes, an efficient return system, it's also real help for prevention. Why? Because someone will think twice before paying, I don't know, a few €1,000 to a facilitator in order to bring him to Europe, if he will know that after apprehension, if he is really not in need for protection, he will be for sure returned. Regarding the problems encountered, the main problems, I think my colleague Tomasz can give you better inputs as coming from the member state and organizing flights, and in the same time Marco.
Well, one problem we are facing in the member states, or I'm speaking now from my country, Austria, is, as I mentioned before, the legal constellation or the legal basis we're having. So, as just said, we only can detain returnees or people who are nominated for return flights 72 hours before the flight starts. So we only have this period. And the second one, which I also stated before, is our jurisdiction provides us with the obligation, or gives us the obligation, to inform possible returnees on expected return operations. So once we, in the initial phase, in the pre-return phase, we are inquiring about the state or the local authorities, is there a necessity of returning to a certain destination, and then they are nominating persons who are, where all the decision orders or all the phases of appeal were done or went through, and they are nominated and sent to us in our department. And then, by law, in fact, you are obliged to inform them that they will be returned. So this is also one thing which eventually has to be streamlined, speaking about efficient return to original countries.
That's indeed the case. And then, of course, we've got the cooperation with the countries of origin to start with. That depends. That nowadays, along with the Commission, we try to support each other, work together, have high-level delegations going, for instance, to Nigeria, filled by experience from the return field, so that the Commission is not only talking about the political and policy issues, but also what really needs to be done. I think that's a great step forward. But at the end, even if people are ready to be returned voluntary force, you still have the national policy, where people can apply for asylum, repeatedly asylum, people have medical issues, they have to be dealt with, so there's a lot of burden. And last week, as the DTNV, Dutch Repatriation Part Service, we had a charter along with our Belgian friends, financed by Frontex, to Albania. It was quite successful. Why was it successful? Not because it was like 200 or 300 people, it was 30 people. But why was it successful? Because we did it along with Albanian authorities also. It was something we followed by together. We followed by together, we worked together, and now we have to bring it a step further, because in the country of origin, there has to have a moral standard that going illegal to Europe isn't the answer. And we're now on that path of talking with them how we can make campaigns or something. And then I fully agree with the professor, then we need new ideas. Then we need to broaden our perspective and try something new, because we really did that sometimes in Africa and it still didn't work, it was still coming. So it's not an easy solution or one solution, but I think you also really think you have to ask the people who are coming here. Often we forget, we're sitting here talking about measures, talking about everything, but why did somebody came in the first place?
Okay, Tomasz, if you want to.
Yeah, may I just add one point why the return operations are not working? It's simply because of the reluctance of the countries of origin, because they are sometimes not accepting and to take back their own citizens. So I just give you one example. In beginning of March, I was part of a EU delegation to Nigeria to discuss about the readmission agreement. And it was not stated on the table, but there is this small rumor or very nice going story around, which kind of translates, we like European Union, but we love Western Union. So what does it say? So European Union kind of provides millions of financial means to African states. But in the case of Nigeria, Western Union transfers each year $22 billion from the diaspora, which are living around the world, to Nigeria. So this is one reason why countries are reluctant, because the money which is transferred back to the country of origin is a substantial part of their PIB.
Okay, thank you. Only to change a little bit the order, so Guy, please.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the points I wanted to make earlier, that actually there is an interest on the part of sending states in the business of migration, which has to be factored in to any future agreements which the EU might choose to conclude. And up to now, the EU's emphasis has been far too much on its own interests, on control and removal, rather than recognizing and factor in the perfectly valid interests of other states. I don't have a great deal of sympathy either for calls for more detention. The UK has no limit on the amount of time it may detain someone while it is reasonably pursuing the objective of removal. The consequence is that it has to have a budget line for unlawful imprisonment. It compensates individuals wrongly detained, on average about up to £4 to £5 million per year, and I don't think that's a solution which any other country would seriously want to emulate. I think in regard to removals, far more could be achieved by better management locally, and as I've been emphasizing throughout, by improving relationships with countries of origin. Thank you.
Adriano?
Yeah, I want to touch upon a point which emerges in several discussions, or many discussions we are in, and that's the question, is fundamental rights an obstacle to implement returns? I mean, this comes up all the time, and I think it's important to address it, because what we see, you mentioned the asylum system before. Now, if we compare asylum procedures and return procedures over the last decades, through the international community, UNHCR, and now through EASO, there's been a lot of capacity building at a national level when it comes to ensuring that asylum procedures respect certain standards, are carried out in a way that is fair for the individuals and so on. We did not have this for return procedures. So indeed, there are a number of cases where return decisions are appealed, and the appeal is upheld, often because very simple procedural safeguards have not been respected. Notification was not properly done, there was no interpretation, or there was no proper interpretation. So I think what is also important is to look at, in a way, within Europe, at our own procedures and how we implement the basic due process safeguards that apply also to to return procedures as to any other procedures, right to be heard, right to an effective remedy, of course the assistance of the linguistic assistance, the assistance of a lawyer, so that all these elements are built in already in the first instance when return decisions are carried out. And in my view, it's important to find ways by which the fundamental rights considerations that need to be applied in return decisions are actually built in from the very beginning, and this would actually increase the effectiveness of return. So to come back to what Per was saying, my message here is to say that fundamental rights, in fact, can help improve also the efficiency of returns.
Okay, thank you. So only to summarize, so there are two kinds of difficulties, national ones, and then some difficulties that are outside of the member state coming from the third country. And I will give you only a short example, from practice. For example, to return to Afghanistan. Afghanistan authorities will say, okay, we will receive on Kabul airport only people from Kabul area. And then if he's from Mazar Sharif, for example, you have to return him there, but there's no airport in Mazar Sharif. And secondly, I will answer for the second part of the question regarding the return. So we are focusing on some main points. First point will be return decisions, when we will go and evaluate a state. If there is a return decision issued for every illegal stayer. But what is also important, if the member state has opted for the Article 2.2a or 2 and 2.2b from the return directive, which will mean that they will consider border cases, so they will be out of implementing some provisions of the return directive. Secondly, if the return decision will be available in the language of the irregular migrant, and so on and so forth. Then we'll go to effective return system. From the number of, and we will compare the numbers of return decisions issued, the number of asylum applications, and the number of effective returns. And why there are differences, what are the difficulties encountered, how you made use of Frontex, how you made use of the available funds like AMIF. Then we will go to detention capacity and detention facilities. Detention capacity, is this allowing to have returnees? Are there any other forms, you know, of private accommodations or open detention centers? Then if the detention facilities are in full respect of human rights, so this is also a very important part, and we are mentioning this in the evaluation. Then we will go, if there is a monitoring system and if it is effective. So we will cover all the parts, and the return, the human rights part is very, very, very important and taken in consideration. And because we are under time pressure, I would like to thank you, to address thanks to my colleagues, to address thanks to you, because without you, we will not have had this conversation. I consider it as a very effective and fruitful debate, and I wish you a pleasant stay for all here, and with a lot of knowledge gathering here. So thank you for attending this.